Hi all, thanks so much for watching Making AI Work for You, bringing together the stars of academia, medicine, and venture capital. Thanks so much for watching today. I'm Stephanie Fields, and today I am joined by Dr. Matthew Lungren, who is the Chief Scientific Officer of Health and Life Sciences at Microsoft, and also is an adjunct professor at Stanford University School of Medicine. We are also excited to welcome Sherri Douville, CEO of Medigram Chair of the Trustworthy Technology and Innovation Consortium, the TTIC for short, and she is also a series editor for Taylor and Francis and has co-authored and edited a number of books that have defined the field of healthcare IT. And finally, of course, my co-host, Dr. Apurv Gupta, who is a vice president at Premier and former hospitalist. Thanks so much to all of you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So, Dr. Lundgren, you've said so many amazing things during the pre-interview about all of the different ways that working in medicine and then working in technology fuse together. And you said multiple times that you can't do it alone. It is definitely a group effort. And you said that a lot of times people reach out to you on, social media and other things and ask you questions like, how do you make decisions? How do you monitor the technology? Then you also said there's an immense weight of making these decisions for people. Once you've been in the room with a patient, taking care of them, you have a different perspective. It's not just, does this technology work? It's, how is this going to apply in real life? So with that, why don't you tell us a little bit about what drew you to Microsoft and the work that you're doing there and how you feel that it merges those worlds that you've seen from both sides?
Yeah, no, thanks. Yeah, I mean, my journey is definitely slightly non-traditional in a lot of ways, but I think I came into technology fairly early in my research career. So I was, at Stanford for 10 years as a research faculty, half-time clinical, half-time research, and the typical academic pressure to publish or perish and get your grants and do all those things, kind of navigated that over the years. But I was really focused on public health, pop health, and to do that, at least, from my perspective, you need a lot of data and you need to process that data in various ways. And so really focused on natural language processing initially. So a lot of, kind of adjacent AI related topics. And this was happening right at the time of, the sort of the latest, I guess, AI wave, which was the deep learning kind of boom, right around 2013 or so, where ImageNet and things were really starting to bring neural networks back into vogue in the sort of the long arc of, AI. And it was just really a great time because, I had been gathering large amounts of data and processing them and trying to tackle them with various techniques. And then deep learning kind of came along and really accelerated that. And so through the course of my academic career, you rise up the ranks as you do, and qualified for a sabbatical. And did my sabbatical actually at Microsoft Research. And this was, I had worked with tech, right? I'd sort of helped develop something called the Amy Center, the Artificial Intelligence and Medicine and Imaging Center at Stanford. Grew it, a huge center. We worked a lot with industry, of course, but really hadn't had a chance to be on the other side of the table, right? Until the sabbatical experience. So I did that, and it was just I can't say enough good about the experience. At least for someone like me, I was, looking all around the organization for different techniques and approaches that people were taking to problems, mostly outside of healthcare, and then saying, well, wow, that would actually work for us in the healthcare world. Like, a good example is at the time the Xbox group was trying to really solve game streaming. If you know much about the problem, it's how do you stream a really, really large, complex, game essentially, right? There's a lot of that goes into that. There's a lot of cloud engineering. There's a lot of processing and things. But also in healthcare, we need to process large amounts of data, and specifically in medical imaging, right? So there's really interesting projects that I was able to spin up, and I think I kind of got the bug for, kind of what I do now, which is I kind of sit horizontally. My group sits very horizontally in the organization, and we try to have this kind of bi-directional flow. We have, PMs and engineers and data scientists, and we sort of are kind of forward-looking in the sense that, what's happening in, obviously now today in the generative AI world, what's happening in different, verticals, and could those solutions kind of, be applied to some of the problems we have in healthcare and translating that, right? But then the other direction is, what are some of the problems that we're finding in healthcare? And, can we translate those problems in a way that would help drive solutions that might come from either, internal groups or frankly, even in the broader community? So It's a lot of fun. It's a lot of work, and certainly in this current environment, things are changing very quickly. So there's never a dull moment. But some of the fundamentals that you kind of pointed out are still, at least to me, non-negotiable truths, right? This is a team sport in healthcare, in particular, right? If you're designing or building something in healthcare, the stakes are higher. The risk tolerance is probably the lowest it can be, and it's everyone has to be cognizant of the fact that at the other end of the solution, even if it's something small or maybe even something that might be a quote unquote back office solution, there's still a person and a life at the end of that solution chain, right? So I think having a healthy respect for that is kind of been really important, and that's a cultural thing that I think they've nailed here, but something that again, who's the expert for data science? Who's the expert for the clinical use case? And again, it may not be a physician, it may be a nurse or a healthcare administrator, et cetera. But having all those stakeholders at the table, and then actually kind of having that beginner's mindset too, right? I mean, there is a tendency to kind of think, oh, look, it works. This demo worked or this solution works. Why can't we just throw it out in the world, right? Well, there's a lot of other considerations I think that are really important to consider in that process, and it's something that I've been very impressed by in my time here.
Oh, Dr. Lundgren, you had so much to say. I'm thinking of three or four different, questions, and I'll see if I can articulate them well enough to maybe connect the dots. The one thing you said that really caught my attention is there's something that in terms of the culture that Microsoft has really nailed. And I would really love to understand your perspective on what is it? How did they do that? What was their commitment that got them there? Is it a combination of management expertise? Is it a combination of how well they use the technology? So I particularly love your thoughts on that, and perhaps that might be a bridge to another related question, which is what makes the difference in your mind from interesting project to really successful implementation?
Yeah, no, well, so yeah, I think folks may know that about 4 years ago or so, Microsoft acquired Nuance Communications, and a lot of folks might be familiar with Nuance. If you're not, it had a lot of things that it was known for, but the one in healthcare is essentially the speech to text technology, right? Dating all the way back into the 90s, right? And bringing that into healthcare, and really almost, I mean, I would say I think it's 80% or something of physicians across the country are using some version of that speech to text over the last decades or so. And so that requires a lot of institutional knowledge. It requires a lot of understanding of the use cases, the customer base, in this case, healthcare providers and the workforce, and then also health IT, right? Which is in and of itself an entire discipline. And I think that kind of institutional knowledge has now been kind of infused into this HLS ecosystem that Microsoft has put together. It's just been really, really fun to be a part of that. And the part I like the most, though, is that you have someone that is coming from that background, understanding healthcare, understanding use cases, even what it takes to bring a product into a market that can be challenging, right? But on the other side of the table, you have folks that are they can bring the latest technology. Obviously, cloud is really where I think a lot of the things are going to be moving towards, and continue to do so. And then now with generative AI, so you kind of have this really interesting blend, and that's again why I enjoy being kind of seated horizontally across both worlds, and of course then you bring in the research aspect of that, and you've kind of got a really nice blend of expertise, and then still someone that understands what that last mile, has a healthy respect for that last mile, I should say, and what it takes to bring something successfully into the healthcare ecosystem. Um, yeah, I think for me, I think the most exciting thing that maybe that folks in the audience would be familiar with, at least as a common, sort of language to understand here, is probably the DAX Copilot solution, right? This is that ambient note solution. And again, this has been kind of a brass ring for a long time for those in the NLP world, right? How do you take a transcript of a physician-patient conversation or other healthcare worker conversation? How do you take that long, recorded thing that people are talking about, their cousin's wedding, and in between talking about their knee pain or whatever, and how do you turn that into a note that can save the provider's time? that sounds kind of straightforward, I think, on its face, but it is a really, really hard NLP problem before we had this sort of generative AI boom. And I know that because, we had worked on something like this at Stanford in my lab for a long time. And a lot of those challenges have to do with context, understanding the medical terminology, et cetera, et cetera. So when you see this solution now, again, being used in just, the a little more than a year that it's been out, 500, healthcare systems are using it. I have clinicians stopping me when they find out I work at Microsoft, and they want to tell me a story about how they were going to retire because the burden of documentation was getting too much, or they were missing too many, their kids' ball games or dinners or whatever, or others that were saying their patients are overwhelmed with just being able to talk to their physician face to face and not, the back of their head as they're working on a computer screen. I can't say enough about the work it takes to go from building that solution, but then bringing it into using the institutional knowledge of a company that understands, again, that last mile, the health IT, the workforce, where it works, where it doesn't. It's really been a wonderful thing to be a part of. And so again, I like to take credit for it where I can. Of course, that's not the project I currently lead, but I think it's a great example of a high value, low risk use case that is really driving value for clinicians on day one.
Sherri, you are passionate about patient safety, ethics, technology that's really going to drive healthcare forward. So being able to hear the things that Dr. Lungren is talking about and how they have transformed the patient experience already, what are you seeing and what are these opportunities that you hope that other clinicians might be able to take away from the things that he's saying and the mindset that he's approaching these from?
Well, it sounds like they're starting with a great foundation of a lot of teamwork that's cross-functional. So I love to hear that. And I'd love to hear more about the rest of the bench in terms of implementation, Dr. Lundgren, because you mentioned sort of the R&D and productization stack, but, then what about the deployment and implementation? Because I think that challenges every technology company of every size, which is something I'm super passionate about. But one of the things that we work on in the Trustworthy Technology and Innovation Consortium is just to provide frameworks that constituents can get behind and not ourselves. So I got to co-chair the IEEE UL 2933 subgroup for trust, which is an ANSI accredited 317 technical experts in 22 countries based on TIPS, which is trust, identity, privacy, protection, safety, and security. So the way that I look at things is I tend to look at things in terms of systems and what can we do at the system level to accelerate trust as quickly as possible. And I think you're talking about sort of downstream, how that trust gets built across the multiple stakeholders that would have to work together to operationalize the kind of frameworks that we've been working about and talking about here in TTIC. And so the reason why I bring up like a trust infrastructure is because I do think, and I look forward to being able to provide a lot of relief, like you're talking about spending pajama time and like so much time documenting and doing these administrative tasks that physicians weren't trained for, they don't like. I feel that, and I want to see how we can do everything we can. And I think that agentic AI has enormous promise and potential to help alleviate some of that by automating a lot. But we have to get it right. We have to make sure we get it right in order for it to realize the promise that it has.
Yeah, I'll pick up on that a little bit, Sherri, and connect it back to what Dr. Lundgren was also talking about. Dr. Lundgren, I mean, the promise of this ambient listening is just amazing. I particularly really love talking to my fellow colleague primary care physicians who for years, maybe even longer, have just been pulling their hair out saying, this is just it. This is too much. We can't handle this. This is driving us over the edge. And then with ambient listening, it's a complete turnabout. They're, really amazingly saying this is saving me. As I think the stories that you're also hearing, I was thinking about retiring, but now I might last a few more years. It's just tremendous. So I guess what that opens up is maybe the question is a lot of it still hype? Is a lot of it still wonderment and awe of what's going on? Or is this actually really what's being delivered on the ground? Where is this likely to go then? Is this the is this technology itself what's really going to save us from the brink, Dr. Lundgren, or do you feel that there are other technologies combined with this that this is maybe just a harbinger of?
Yeah, that's a good question. Where to start? I think, if I look at the course of my, I guess, 20 years now in healthcare, and you might resonate with this. I think that if I were to be able to, kind of go back in time and look at what I was doing when I started, and then, fast forward to today and compare that, it's kind of almost like a boiling frog problem. Like it felt like, every so often you get, oh yeah, here's another note you need to do now. Here's another thing you have to check, and it just kind of stacked up, right, over the course of the last, at least in my career. I'm sure it goes back beyond that. And, I say that because I think there's a lot of work still to do. And it's really that administrative burden that it's not just about, the encounter note. There's all kinds of other documentation tasks as you're seeing. We have this, wonderful strategic partnership with Epic, and they're able to say, listen, we also know our domain and our customer base. And by the way, we, as the system of record are able to kind of deliver these things into the hands of clinicians, understanding their pain points. I think at the latest UGM, I think they had 100 things on their roadmaps of things. And these are all like layers of an onion that I think we're going to need to start peeling back, safely and responsibly, to Sherri's comments, and deciding how best to do that. And to that point, if you take an example, the inbox, generative AI inbox solution where it would sort of draft a response. Now, UCSD, I think, is a great example of an institution that is incredibly focused on governance, safety, and responsible AI. And sort of the way they, as one of the early users of this, implemented is they said, listen, it may be a little off-putting to some patients to have their note generated by AI but not know about it. So let's actually just be fully transparent. And so and there's actually Chris Longhurst, shout out to Chris. There's actually a little disclaimer at the bottom that just says this note was partially generated by, AI. And these are the kinds of things we have to implement these responsibly and safely, but yet we still have a very, very long to-do list, I think, in healthcare, right? To start to get to the place where we feel like we've been unburdened, quote unquote, from some of the administrative work. I think ambient is a phenomenal first use case. And to your point, I'd love to say, it was quote unquote easy, but what I've experienced, at least here now for one of the first times in my career after building all these AI solutions for so long, is I have clinicians like stopping me and asking me for it, or stopping me to talk about it. And it's been a long time since I've seen a quote unquote AI solution that has had that kind of adoption and frankly persistent use. And so that's how you hit a home run, frankly. And right, especially given the sort of audience having been, maybe slightly jaded over the years of all the, shiny tech, and we still have fax machines in our office, right? That contrast is still pretty stark. But there's a long list, and whether it's Epic or some EHR provider, or whether it's our group or someone else, but more than ever, this technology is accessible, right? I mean, you all have access to some of the most powerful AI tools on the planet, and you can just log in and start using them. And so I think there's a bit of a bottoms up part of this too. And this is where the work that Sherri's doing, and again, I know there's other groups as well, is so important. Because if we just start throwing solutions out there without the multidisciplinary teams, without the understanding of the use case, frankly, without, as you started with the beginning, Stephanie, the understanding the gravity of exactly what we're doing, I think we're gonna go off course. And so that's why I think it's so important. And we've taken that as job zero, frankly, here. I mean, we've released many different tools for responsible AI. The things that we learned, frankly, in leveraging generative AI in healthcare use cases, we say, hey, we needed this tool to put a guardrail on. We need this tool to show where this particular information came from. All that work we're also packaging up. We, in fact, just launched something at the recent health conference, a suite of solutions that actually provide healthcare specific guardrails and capabilities to allow some of these, generative AI solutions to come into reality, but in a safe, responsible way. So, long story short, this ambient note thing is not hype at all. In fact, again, I think it's one of those things where it can't come fast enough.
It's kind of fascinating, actually, that you were talking about the note and the transcription and putting the little disclaimer that was generated by AI, because in a way, it seems like people are almost more confident with things that are in their direct control, which really leaves more room for error in a lot of ways than AI might. For example, I happened to be reading the notes on one of my after visit summaries, and it said something about recent marijuana use. I am so straight edge. I've never had a beer or a cigarette. And I was like, in marijuana use, what? And I called my provider and she said, oh, she actually laughed and she goes, oh, I was using voice transcription. That doesn't make that okay. You have to double check. And I realized after, and I thought, I called her back and I said, I know what you said and what that read it as. I said, you said something about migraine aura. And she's like, oh, that is, yep, that was it. It must have just gone to my marijuana use. But that, it's weird that somebody would be comfortable with a voice transcription like that does not have any oversight, yet generative AI has these guardrails that everybody is paying attention to. So it probably would have been a much better experience. And I would have been notified by seeing that it was done with generative AI, whereas there wasn't. It's just so strange to me that people are really fearful of some of these things that have guardrails built in, yet the things that could be affected by burnout or stress or anything else don't have those checks built in. So with that, when you were talking back to at the beginning of the conversation about how sometimes when you don't have a team approach, people just implement one thing because maybe a physician thinks this is what it should be and they have their opinion, they haven't worked in technology, and then people in technology have not been in that room. Like you said, you should be in attending for 4 to 5 years before you're really evaluating these tools properly, or have that ability. So when you're looking at these things, how do you know, okay, this is what it is, this is what I need to go all in on? When somebody asks me for a recommendation, I feel confident that this is what it's going to be, that's going to meet the needs for the patients, meet the needs for the burden that we have, reducing the admin burdens, and really have a chance of making it into mainstream healthcare, because that is an incredible challenge in itself.
Yeah, and I think that's such a critical question. I mean, when we have, like, you can imagine with generative AI being as popular as it is, being as accessible it is, and again, sort of folks using it, and physicians using it, nurses, everybody's using it, I think, at some level in their daily lives, or at least they're exploring it. They're going to come up with a list. And so, I go to some of these health systems and, give talks or whatever. And, afterwards, folks will kind of come up with almost like a to-do list. Like, here's all the cool things that I want to do with this technology. Like, and I was able to build a little demo with it or whatever it is. And so there is a bit of this that's bottoms up, where I honestly believe that if again, Stanford has done this really well. So they said, listen, we know that this is a new general purpose technology that has applications almost in every role in the health system. Again, not even in patient-facing roles, right? So how do we set up an environment? So, the NYU has published about this, their experience doing this as well, but setting up a HIPAA compliant cloud-based access to the use of these models as like a general purpose use case has been incredibly powerful for these institutions and groups. Number one, it reduces some of the risk and obviously some of the compliance problems with trying to use a public API, which I'll make another statement here, do not do that. Do not put PHI, please, into a public API. But more importantly, it's allowing little cultures to form, saying, hey, this thing worked for me. Hey, this thing worked for me. And at a macro level, they're able to analyze, okay, what are people using it for? And how does that change over time? And then maybe this is such a popular or common thing, we need to operationalize that. And again, that's where the sort of the broader Microsoft for cloud and healthcare, and we have that kind of oversight. We have that sort of relationship with a lot of different parts of the healthcare ecosystem. So we might see these trends happening at multiple different places, or we might find that these kinds of solutions work, and make those available, right? And help share the learnings, I think, which is really critically important. And particularly when it comes to some of those things like, guardrails, safety, monitoring, and frankly, we hadn't touched on this, but security in general, right? I mean, cyber attacks are on the rise for health systems, and putting yourself in a position with a trusted partner, versus maybe just trying to cobble something together. I think there's a pretty obvious choice there, at least from my perspective. And so, yeah, I mean, the use cases are vast. But what I try to do is I have actually a slide that I like to show, which is sort of this quadrant. On the y-axis is risk, and on the x-axis is value. And I want to find things that are really high value and low risk, because there's so many. and sometimes things you wouldn't have thought of. And this is where again that multidisciplinary comes into play. And then start tackling those. Is the technology mature enough for that? If you implement it, do you have someone in the loop that is receiving that information that is able to, either take that information, do something with it, or identify an error or problem with that, right? These are all the things that you have to kind of think through. And we have an entire part of the organization that sort of works with healthcare clients on sort of operationalizing some of these use cases with Gen AI.
I could just continue listening to Dr. Lundgren go on because I think each and every one of these is power packed. And again, wrestling with a couple of different questions that I want to ask. But Dr. Lundgren, I guess I'll go back to I'm hearing about the guardrails and how that was so critical for you in terms of rolling forward the solutions. Could we unpack that a little bit more and maybe give some hopefully in user-friendly kind of language? What are some examples of the guardrails that kind of needed to be in place so that the solutions could be implemented safely? And then relatedly to that, I have a question about what could the physician executive be able to do in order to be able to help their health system actually implement some of these solutions, hopefully learning and leveraging the same similar guardrails as well.
Yeah, I mean, so again, guardrails is a kind of, as you're sort of pointing out, kind of a large kind of wastebasket term, but it really, at least in this situation, like, I'll give you a great example. So you've heard of retrieval augmented generation, or commonly called RAG. It's funny how common that terminology is now. It used to be like only like the super deep, AI folks knew that, and now everyone's like, oh yeah, I use RAG. But anyways, it's the ability to sort of direct the model towards a particular, let's just put it, a document, for example, in this case, or maybe it's the guidelines, or maybe it's an ICD list, or whatever the use case is. If you get the output and you're able to link it back to that information to double check to say, okay, where did that come from? And I think you've seen an example of this. And this is, again, what's so cool about being here right now is that you're learning all of these capabilities and you're seeing them being used in other applications that are much lower risk. I think being Copilot's a good example where you sort of have, the answers are linked. So you can say, okay, where did that come from? Do I want to, trust that source, or do I want to, amend my question, or whatever? So that same thing can happen in a healthcare use case. So can I click on the medication that, where did it get that information? How does it know that, right? Or even better, can I actually ground it, quote unquote, with this technique to, literature, or to again, an institutional guidelines or flow sheet or document. So that's the kind of stuff. And there's a lot of these, and then I just really want to hammer this point home. This is not just a healthcare problem, right? This is a problem across industries, or a challenge to find how do we create trustworthy, powerful solutions that actually solve problems. And at least, again, where I sit, I'm able to kind of, quote unquote, arbitrage some of that over into the healthcare space. So it's really been very interesting. And again, I certainly can't take credit, by the way, for a lot of the things that we've been putting out there, because again, there's a large team here in the HLS division that spans all kinds of platforms and solutions. But to your last point, though, like, what does a healthcare executive really do here? I mean, there's probably a lot of things coming at them. How do they vet things? How do they choose a partner for the long term? I think one of the first things that again, as a academic, I suppose, but I really feel like education is kind of job one here. I think educating the workforce on the pros and cons, where the technology is, learning about the technology, just basically raising the literacy, the quote unquote AI literacy of the organization, I think is really, really important. I've dedicated a good chunk of my career to doing that as well. And it's possible to do it in a non-technical way. Like, you don't have to go learn Python and do, linear algebra to really, grok some of these concepts. And as we've said a couple of times here, now more than ever, this technology is accessible like never before, right? And so just spending some time getting your 6, 10, 15 hours of experience using the model, getting a feel for it, really does make a huge difference. So I think all those things together, I think we're going to start to see more opportunities to tackle some of the things that, again, can move things out of our way to bring back the humanity in the practices that we all train so hard to do.
You are right aligned with the EU AI Act, because the first milestone is workforce literacy. So, with life sciences being a focus in your division, I'm sure that's a whole nother conversation for a different day, right? But I'm glad to hear you're right aligned with that. I did want to ask you a quick question about startups, which is partially what I'm with a startup. But does Microsoft see themselves driving innovation and growth? I know that Epic has a very large roadmap of 100 items, but do you see opportunities that are outside of or adjacent to Epic as being something that would motivate some of the work that you're doing?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think that the startup activity has been, more active than ever before right now, and it's really the lifeblood of innovation, even to this day. I think that the horizons have extended out maybe more than ever before, right? Some of the things you used to say, oh, that's going to be hard to build or do, or that's becoming slightly more possible than ever, I think. And from the Microsoft perspective, we have an entire part of the organizations. We have something called the Pegasus program for startups that it really is kind of centered on healthcare, where we're providing tools and capabilities, and in some cases access to some of the powerful models to allow them to build use cases and deliver their solutions into the real world. And then as a still as a platform company, are there ways to work together and bring some of these solutions into the health systems sooner? I think that one of the things we announced at Health was being able to store the audio from the DAX Copilot encounter. And then you can imagine a company that has let's just say a voice biomarker or something, right? That can leverage that information to provide additional value. Well, let's work together on that. And you can kind of see this ecosystem sort of forming around it. My group works in the multimodal foundation model space for healthcare. So, think about radiology, ophthalmology, dermatology, right? How do we bring those capabilities into the world? And again, the things that we've recently launched are open source. They're really meant to be getting folks from zero to the 50-yard line, so to speak, right? To bring a solution into the world that's focused on multimodal. So I think we have a pretty nice balanced sort of solutions that we directly provide to the ecosystem, but then also a very rich suite of solutions and capabilities for startups and other innovators to build on.
Thank you so much for being here, Dr. Lundgren. This was a fantastic conversation, and hopefully all of your other fellow physician executives have learned from you today and heard the things that you're saying to embrace this technology, but to weigh the considerations from both ends and don't go it alone. I think that was one of the big messages. Learn about it and don't go it alone. So thank you so much for being here and sharing.
Thank you so much. It was my pleasure.
Thank you all for watching. We'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.